Hi, this is Andrew Collin with Critical Path Training, and in this module we're going to do a little overview of the client object model and then dive right into the .NET portion of that client object model in the client object model session. So first, why do we have this thing called the client object model? Microsoft has been constantly getting requests from customers and from ISVs alike and partners for more web services to make it easier for us to get data out of SharePoint from outside of SharePoint. So if I wanted to have something running on my laptop that pulled data out of SharePoint, I could use some of the web services that Microsoft gave me, but maybe I didn't have web services that did everything I needed to have happen. So my option was either to ask for Microsoft to put more web services in the next version or create my own custom web services. And the request, it would be a constant battle of creating more and more web services over and over and over and over with each release of SharePoint. So Microsoft took a different approach. What they did was they created something called the client object model, and it's exposed in 3 different flavors, both in .NET and Silverlight and SharePoint. I'm sorry, .NET, Silverlight, and ECMAScript. That's going to allow us to go through and to get data out of SharePoint from a box that's not running on a SharePoint server. So let's say like JavaScript could run inside of a page that was loaded from a SharePoint site. What this is going to allow us to do is that we now don't go through the heavy overhead of the SOAP-based web services for like the list service. It's now going to be a lot easier for us to get the data. You'll see too about how this was implemented in this session here. That's going to make it very intuitive, very easy to work with here. The nice thing though about this is that you'll see the API is very similar to what the standard SharePoint API is that we've worked with on the server, the whole SP sites and SP webs and all that stuff. Okay. So what are the different supported areas, or where can I actually work with the client object model to get stuff out of SharePoint? And as you can see here, it's just about everything. You're going to be able to get to sites and site collections, list items, lists. You're going to be able to get to views, the view schemas, files, folders. There's a bunch of stuff you're going to be able to get to using the client object model. So you're going to have a lot of power with this new thing here of being able to work off the SharePoint box. Now, the way this works, well, first of all, the way it was implemented, one of the nice things that you'll see about the client object model is that for the most part, there's 2 basic flavors of the client object model. There's the managed component, which is what you would use in, say, .NET applications, or you'd use in, say, Silverlight. And then there's the JavaScript, or the ECMAScript version. The reason that there's a little bit of a difference here, or the reason why you see 2 different flavors, is just because the way that you go through and read and write properties inside of JavaScript prototypes or ECMAScript prototypes is going to be a little bit different than you would with managed objects. So the syntax just looks a little bit different, but all the concepts are basically the same. So if you look at how we do stuff inside of SharePoint, where we have to get things like an SP context, we're going to have to get these new things called a client context. And what that's going to do is get a kind of a frame of reference for SharePoint, for the client object model, to find out what is he talking to. This is where you're essentially going to pass in the URL of the site that you're trying to hit. So SharePoint knows, oh, I'm working inside of this context right here. JavaScript is the only one that's a little bit different, where I can't pass in the URL, because if I did, then it would be cross-site scripting, where JavaScript on the client could be talking to another site, and that's considered cross-site scripting, so you can't do that. You'll see here that some of the objects that you're familiar with, SP site, SP web, SP list item, all of these different things here, all of the fields are going to be the same inside of all the different objects. But you see, we've dropped the SP, and that's for mostly like just a convention, a standard convention for making sure that we pass certain rules, certain like FXCOP rules and stuff like that. The nice thing about this, though, is you can ensure that you've got like the good fidelity between all the different objects because of the way Microsoft implemented this entire setup. So the way it's done is that they actually went into the server API, the Microsoft.SharePoint server API that we're used to using, and they decorated all these different objects with attributes that just say, is this going to be in the client API or not? And so then they have a code gen tool that runs, looks at the existing API, and builds out all of the client API, the subset client API from the stuff that was already set up, so that you know that that was already configured to say this is a client object, or this is available in the client. This is cool here because now your .NET client object model, your Silverlight client object model, and your ECMAScript client object model all know that they're using the same object, so you don't have one that's going to work one way and the other one that's going to work a little bit different, or potential for a bug there, because they're all done to code gen. You'll see too how we're going to go through and leverage these guys. There are two assemblies that we have to add references to for the managed ones. And one of them is going to be more for the client object model subset object model that we're used to using, that we can use in the client. The other one's going to be the transport mechanism of basically serializing its stuff and then passing it back into SharePoint through a WCF service. So this is talking about how we're going to go through and use this. So on the right-hand side of this slide, what you see here is we have the client service. That's a WCF service that the client object model is going to talk to. He's going to know how to go through and to do all the work and handle the work of talking to the SharePoint server object model that we're used to using. For the managed clients, so the .NET and the Silverlight clients, you see here at the bottom left of the slide here that we're working with the managed API that's then going to talk to a proxy. That proxy is the extra assembly that we're going to need to add a reference to that knows how to serialize everything and do all the transport and the communication between the client and the client. Between the client object model or the managed client that I'm running, like say on my laptop or in a Silverlight control, and knows how to talk to the client WCF service and then get the results back and hand those in and hand those back to the actual client object model. So that's why you have two different pieces there. The ECMAScript one that you see there in the upper left, it works very much the exact same way, except he has a little bit different setup because he's not managed versus the other one is managed. So let's take a look now at the client object model for the .NET client object model. So this is the screenshot here is just a little show of what the code is going to look like here. So the way this is going to work is you're first going to create a client context. You can see I'm getting a client context from my intranet site. And then I'm going to tell it I want to go through and go get a specific site collection. Now, the client object model is smart enough to know that it's not going to go through and grab every single thing when I say I want to get this one piece here. So in this case here, you say that I want to go get the site collection for this context. Now, at that first line where it says site collection, I don't actually have a reference to the site collection. I then have to tell the client context, the client object model, to go get that site collection for me. So he's then going to go out and go pull in the fields that he needs for that site collection. So I have now a lightweight site collection object. I can't just start working with it right away. It's going to throw an error otherwise. Right? So I'm going through and pulling back that information. Once I've done that, then I can go through and get a reference to my SP web. Or in this case, because it's a client object model, it's just a web object. So I'm doing the same thing there. But let's say that, for example, if I want to go through and get a bunch of lists or some data from all the SharePoint lists, but I really only want to get the titles from that list. I don't need all the other information. I don't need all the items. I don't need the descriptions. I just want the titles. You can see here in this one thing, in this one little sample, where I'm saying, passing in a Lambda expression to say that I only want you to go through and get the title field from the different lists. And so when I pass in the context of the web, and then also pass in a Lambda expression, it's going to go through and grab all of the lists, but it's only going to go through all the list collection, but it's only going to fill in the title property. So I'm getting a lightweight object back. I can say if I want a couple fields or just one field, I can specify all that stuff using the client object model. So the client object model is smart enough to make sure that the bandwidth and the payload going back and forth between your client and SharePoint, you have control as a developer to say how big or how little you want that to be. You're not going to go grab everything whenever you want it. Nice way to get lightweight objects. Okay, so let's take a look at this in action. Okay, so in this demo, what we're going to show you is how to work with the .NET Client Object Model. What I've done here is I've created a console application that's going to use the Client Object Model to go get some information back from a SharePoint site. So what I have here is I've first had to go through and add a couple references to two assemblies. And these are assemblies that you're going to have to provide somebody that's creating a client application. These assemblies are going to be found inside the ISAPI folder, inside the 14 directory. And what I need to get is a reference to the Microsoft.SharePoint.client assembly, and then also the client runtime. This first one is the thing that contains the client object model. This runtime is the thing that contains that transport logic that needs to go back and forth. You do need to have a reference to both of those right now. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm then going to go in and in my console application, I'm then going to go through and get a client context. So we saw this in the slides where I'm going through and getting a reference to my intranet.contoso.com site. I'm then going to go through and tell it I want to go get the site collection itself. But if I try to go through and read the URL from that site collection, I'm going to have an error thrown here because the property of the field has not initialized yet. I first had to go in and tell it I wanted to load the site collection and then execute the query, because I could say load and then do some additional stuff, use the load method to go load additional things, and then batch everything up into one execute query to say go grab everything at one time. So if we see how this works, if I just kind of set a breakpoint here and then hit F5, let's run this guy and kind of walk through the code. So we can see here, I'm first going in, telling it I want to get a reference to the site collection, and now I'm going to try to go through and to get the URL here. But you'll see that it's going to throw an exception because I didn't go through, I don't have this method already, this property already initialized. But if I come down to where I'm loading the site collection itself, I load the site collection, then execute the query, we see it takes a second here because it's actually going out to the SharePoint site, to that client WCF service, and then getting the results back. And now I can go through and I have access to the URL, right? The same thing's going to happen here through this sample where it's going to go through and get a reference to the top level site. We're going to have it jump all the way down here to look at to come down here to this list where I'm going to go through and grab some stuff for the list. So I'm just going to hit F5 and let it run. Now this is the part where I was saying where I can come in and I can tell the client object model that I'm only interested in one property for a lot of stuff I want to pull back. So in this case, I'm saying I want to go back and look at all of the list collection, but I'm only interested in the title where the title is not null. So that's the only thing. I'm only interested in the list and I'm only interested in the title field where the title is not null. So I'm passing in this lambda expression, and then when I execute the query, I come back and I'm going to have a collection of lists that I can then enumerate through, right? There's all my different lists. And so this is going to run right now, and it just showed me all my lists that I pulled back. That's all from running, and right now it's running on the same SharePoint server, but that's a console application that is going through and using the client object model to talk to SharePoint. So I could take this application and I could put it on anybody's laptop and let it run, and it would pass in the credentials that I needed to get access to it.